California, America, the year 1929. On today's show, we'll go over the 20s and everything that's happened. To begin, my co-anchor here, Oliver, will go over the music and entertainment of the 20s and the impact it's had.
In the 1920s, radio helped spread music beyond African American communities in the South. It brought distant events into millions of homes in a way that made magazines and newspapers look useless. The era engendered 600 licensed radio stations to more than 600,000 radio sets. Americans listened to lectures, religious services, news, and weather reports. Consumer products were also advertised in a wide variety. In 1927, many Americans listened to a championship boxing match between Gene Tunney and Jack Dempsey. Before the 20s, such coverage of an event had been impossible. The radio allowed Americans to keep up with current events around the country. Innovations in the motion picture industry in the 1920s also was facilitated by leisure and free time. Urban and suburban Americans looked to new sources of entertainment as a result. The movie industry rose to new heights in the 1920s. From 600 to 100 million Americans went to the movie theaters each week. Small local theaters became America's cultural classroom. Silent movies were considered an ideal source of entertainment considering the growing population of non-English speaking immigrants. Movies were available to anyone with a few cents to spare. By 1926, Hollywood movies accounted for a majority of British and French film markets, resulting in a diffusion of American culture to the rest of the world by cutting across geographical boundaries. Charlie Chaplin, a comedian and popular silent film star, played the Little Tramp in many films. In one of his films, The Immigrant, he depicted the challenges and the uncertainties faced by immigrants. In 1927, the film industry changed with the release of The Jazz Singer, the first movie with sound synchronized with action. Silent pictures faded out and were replaced by talkies. Music in the 1920s was a majority of jazz. Jazz recombined different forms of music, including African American blues, ragtime, and European-based popular art. The musical genre reflected the characteristics and issues of the 1920s with its free, loud, and rebellious, fun rhythm. Jazz was a symbol of the Roaring Twenties. This is an example of The Jazz Singer, and this is an example of the movie theaters in the 1920s. Back to you, Jose.
Now we'll be going to Drew, who will be talking about automobiles and their effects.
Thanks, Oliver. The automobile industry boomed in the 1920s, which was spurred by Henry Ford's efficiencies that increased economic growth in economic industries relating to car manufacture and usage, such as Ford right here. The steel, glass, rubber, asphalt, wood, petroleum, insurance, and road construction industries all benefited from the automobile boom in the 20s. For example, 1/7 of all steel output was used to produce the automobiles. Also, oil discoveries in California, Texas, Mexico, and Oklahoma brought large numbers of workers and money into the Southwest. Petroleum industries now booming, employment and tax revenues in America are now increasing. Therefore, energy in the form of gasoline has had a major impact on American way of life in the 1920s. The road construction industry boomed. The federal government introduced the numbered highway system in 1926. The abundance of new automobiles on the roads led to thousands of service stations, diners, and motels that created new and better paying jobs, spurring national prosperity. Other forms of transportation, such as railroads and trolleys, had declined in usage. The primary objective of cars gave citizens was to allow them the ability to go where they wanted, when they wanted. By 1927, 56% of Americans owned an automobile. The Model T, owned by Ford, was the most popular automobile at this time and was sold for a reasonable price of $290. Ownership of an automobile symbolized citizens' participation in the American dream of success and high standard of living. Lastly, automobiles drastically changed residential patterns. This led to the development of suburban communities connecting cities through highways and roads. That's all for now about automobiles, folks. Back up to you, Oliver.
Now for you all, I will summarize what has become the Harlem Renaissance.
As jazz and blues were an expression of African American experience, the pain was heard through the blues, the joy through the jazz. But in the 1920s, there were other expressions of culture. Novelists, poets, critics, artists, celebrated culture. This flowering of African American culture was known as the Harlem Renaissance. This helped give new vocabulary and dynamic to race relations in the United States. New Negro was added to the vocabulary and suggested a radical break with the past. No longer would Africans endure silently the old ways of exploitation and discrimination. New views expressed primarily in Harlem, which attracted artists and writers from all around the country. In their work, they explored the pains and joys of being black in the United States. Artists like Aaron Douglas created paintings with stylized art that reflected their racial pride and collective historical experience, while others like Jacob Lawrence and Archibald J. Motley Jr. expressed similar sentiment in their colorful paintings of urban life. Claude McKay, probably one of the most famous writers, was also the most militant. He wrote of their struggles for dignity and advancement while facing discrimination. He represented the left wing, while Langston Hughes, another very powerful writer, celebrated their culture and life. One of the most influential singers of the Harlem Renaissance would have to be Louis Armstrong. He revolutionized the way music was listened to in the 20s. Through him, even whites were happy to enjoy the jazz and would go all the way out to Harlem to listen to him. He was probably the most famous and continues to be a great influence on music today. The Harlem Renaissance gave a voice to culture. It altered how whites viewed the blacks, and it completely changed the United States. Now, here we have Langston Hughes playing one of his famous songs. You can see the emotion he puts into it. Next to him, we have one of the most powerful writers, Langston Hughes. We have here art by Aaron Douglas, which is celebrated African American culture. And right here we have the Cotton Club, which was a place where you could go and listen to jazz and blues and enjoy music.